Well, we can speak more on this with Renaud Foucart, who is a senior lecturer at Lancaster University. He joins us now. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, Renaud. So earlier today, we
Hello.
had François Bayrou seeming to suggest that his most controversial proposal, perhaps, that idea of scrapping those two bank holidays, that it's still up for negotiations. Do you think that he would scrap that, and do you think that will help to convince parties to come on his side?
I think it was part of the initial idea of Bayrou was to make a very big visual proposal and immediately to say everything is open to negotiation. So clearly scraping those 2 days of holiday was never going to happen. I'm pretty sure he's willing to consider that, but his idea was always to say, but then if you cancel one of my measures, you need to offer something else in terms of savings for the budget. So is it going to be enough to convince partners? I think it's very hard because what he has to do to convince the socialists is likely to lose him the right-wing Les Républicains. And there is no majority without having at least those two, or Les Républicains and the Rassemblement National, which is what Barnier tried. So I think we're kind of towards the end of the journey here. They've tried the right and the far right with Barnier. They've tried Bayrou, which has the right with him and the outside abstention from the Social Democrats. No, I think the last roll of the dice would be to try to have the Social Democrats in government with some abstention from the right wing, which seems to me quite far-fetched.
It's a really tough situation that France is facing at the moment. Emmanuel Macron has urged Bayrou to try to work with the socialists, as we've been mentioning. He hasn't made any concessions yet, though. How do you think he will look to bring them on side?
I think the first thing he wants to give them is responsibilities. So having a prime minister who is someone really directly coming from the Socialist Party. But the second thing he would need to offer them is something that corresponds to their own program. And at the moment, the socialists are still in a posture of opposition, so they're not themselves responsible for the budget. They're not the one who need to bring those 6% of GDP deficit down. So they suggest we're going to do a top 2% tax on the highest capital owners, which is something technically very difficult because you need to value capital, but that's a bit of a complicated question. But this is something that is totally, anyway, unacceptable for the right wing and for most of the center. So I really think that somehow at the end of the road, the only option would be new elections. But if you look at the polls, the new election would give almost exactly the same result as last time if the left somehow managed to remain united. And if the left, as is also possible, breaks out completely, the alternative is Bardella and a Rassemblement National government, which is something that I think even Bardella doesn't want because they don't want to be in charge of the deficit right now, so close to the election.
It really seems that Macron is kind of out of options here. As you mentioned, if they do hold an election, it's likely to have the same outcome. Well, likely the new prime minister would be likely to face many of the same problems. Give us an idea of what Macron can do to solve this situation.
The big problem, I think, is a lack of sense of a reality of what parliamentary democracy is in every single political party in France. So the mistake of Macron originally was to say, I can ignore the result and I'm going to push my centrist government, although we're like 1/3 of the parliament. But the problem of the others is that they've put a large amount of red lines. So the socialists say we are only joining if we can tax capital massively. Rassemblement National say we only want our program, and even when you give it to them, they just basically want to be in opposition. So the problem really at the moment is red line. And perhaps one thing that could be a solution for Macron is, if there is a new election, is to let people talk a little bit before the election about what they could do. But the problem remains, I think, the same in some way, is that there is a big presidential election coming, which is the only thing that ambitious French politicians care about. And so who would be responsible enough to cut the deficit right now and to take tough decisions like that? That's also why, by the way, I think I still believe it's very hard for me to give zero chance of survival to Bayrou. I think Bayrou is an ideal person as prime minister right now, both for the left and for the right and far right, because he's the one who is an old man, is boring, nobody likes him, and he's willing to take all the difficult decisions. So if he somehow managed to wiggle his way towards a budget this year, this means that the life of all all the other would be so much easier. And so it doesn't take that much. It takes a few abstentions, a few people who don't show up. People don't have to vote for Bayrou. The way the French constitution works, they don't need to have people in favor of Bayrou. They just need to have not too many people against Bayrou. And so if I were Macron, I would still bet on Bayrou, but I think he gave up already.
It seems like everyone's given up at this point. I mean, the fall looks very
I'm
much...
the last one.
You're the last one keeping hope. There's so much chaos now. I mean, looking at the situation and, yeah, the idea that we could have a new prime minister coming in, it just feels chaotic. Who is to blame for all of this?
Really, I think who is to blame is the lack of political maturity of every single of the political parties. So at the end, after the snap election, I think it's quite clear that the first group of party was the left. The left, which was a large group from Mélenchon to the Social Democrats. But they said, we are going to have a prime minister, but we don't want to make any concession. We're going to do our full program. So that was never going to happen. It will not happen in Germany. It will not happen in Spain. Any parliamentary democracy, you need to build coalition and you need to have a majority, at least, who doesn't want to censor you. Then who is to blame? Of course, the arrogance of Emmanuel Macron. We know that all the time he tries to say, I am above the fray. I'm the one making all the decisions. And so it shows at the beginning, after a victory of the left, to name Barnier as prime minister, who was a guy very close to the Rassemblement National. You can, of course, blame the Rassemblement National for not trying to be the reasonable far right a la Meloni, who is willing to somehow stop being super radical, at least on budget issues, and to make some form of coalition. But generally speaking, really, a complete lack of maturity of political parties in France who are simply not ready for the reality of the country, which is there are three blocks, the far right, the center, and the left. Each of them has 1/3 of the parliament, and they need to find a deal, the two of them. It's very simple. Every adult country with a parliamentary democracy does it. France needs to learn, and it will have to learn the hard way, I'm afraid.
We'll have to see how it all plays out on Monday. Renaud, thank you so much for joining us on the program. Really good to talk to you and get your insights today.
Thank you.